Hi, welcome back to Starburst TV. My name is Adrian Estala, and today, as a guest, I welcome Alfredo Bird-Munoz from Slalom. Today's topic is going to be on AI and data governance. Now, there's a lot out there, and if you're like me, over the last year or so, as AI is kind of very quickly emerged, you've kind of done reading, you've watched some videos, you've talked to a lot of people, a lot of different conversations, a lot of different opinions on data governance, certainly a lot of excitement around AI. And what I want to do today with Alfredo's experience and my experience, I want to kind of bring a couple of different topics together. I kind of want to set some context for some of the broader discussions we're all having, kind of raise it up a little bit and say, what are we really talking about? Because I think it really comes down to two primary things, maybe a third, but two primary things. I think the first part of the conversation really is around how we can leverage AI to improve data governance. That's the important piece, right? It's not just about data governance for AI, it's AI for data governance. How do we make data governance better with AI? The second topic is then, if I've got my data governance right, I'm able to automate because of AI. Now, what can I do with that data? How is that better governed data? How is that more useful to my AI engines? How do I leverage AI now that I've got better data governance? And maybe if there's time, the third topic might be really around what is AI governance? So I think is completely different. I think there are elements of data governance and AI governance, but that's a completely different topic that we hopefully, if I can stop talking, we'll get right into it. So Alfredo, welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hey, before we get started, I want to talk about cooking. We had a side conversation before the show, and I said, what a great question to ask. I know your background is Puerto Rico. My background is Mexico. And so I know I cook. It sounds like you cook as well. What's your favorite Puerto Rican dish to cook?
So that's an easy one. And I don't do a very good rendition of it, but mofongo. So for those of you that have been to Puerto Rico, you know that at least my world revolves around plantains in some way, shape, or form. The salty kind, not the sweet kind. But yeah, man, you take some plantains, you fry them, you smash them, you put meat inside of them and some goodness, and it's just wonderful.
Wow. How long does it take to make a mofongo dish?
If you do it right, it takes a long time. If you've got 2 kids, you learn how to do it in about 30 minutes.
And it's all about the quality of the plantain, right? To bring it back to data governance, right?
It's the love that goes into it, man. It's the grandmother's recipe. That's what makes it awesome.
Sweet. Well, my favorite dish, Mexican dish to make, is probably chile rellenos, only because it's hard to get them at a restaurant where they're made right. People will have them at any Mexican restaurant. You'll see chile rellenos, but rarely are they made right because they take a long time to make. You grill a poblano chili pepper, then you peel it, and then you slice it just right, and you take the seeds out if you want, and then you stuff it right, either with some really nice cheeses and some nice meats. And then it varies how you cook it from that point. But I like to kind of take some a special recipe mixture. It's like making fried chicken, so to speak, right? You dip it in some flour and spices, some eggs, so to speak, to kind of give it a fluff, and then you fry it or you bake it. That's a chile relleno, and what you put in it, like the love, so to speak, it makes it delicious. You serve it with a nice side of refried beans. Now I'm hungry and it's early, but fantastic. We got our dishes
up the next time we see each other.
I would love some mofongo for sure, especially if it's made right. Data governance, so outside looking in, right? So I'm in the audience. I'm like, man, I've heard this data governance topic. I've heard it before. I get it. People have been preaching data governance to me for years. So I'm a CDO. I'm like, there's nothing new here, right? As a CDO, as a new CDO years ago, the first thing we did was data governance. And so every company out there has already invested quite a bit of money and time, tears and blood and pain in data governance. And it's like, aren't we there yet? Haven't we already fixed this problem? In comes AI, and all of a sudden, like, oh, you can't do AI without data governance. I don't like that statement. I don't know. I'm not saying I disagree. I just don't like the pause. I don't like the breaks that it creates for initiatives.
Yeah.
What are you thinking?
So it's funny. I've been around governance long enough to have seen it change over the years. And I think there's one thing that has been common throughout, which is this notion of governance can typically be perceived as a roadblock, as an obstacle, as something that prevents you from doing something, right? It's a reason to not go after something. And my perspective has always been that governance is necessary, one, right? You need to have some level of control, some level of trust over your data, over your process, whatever you're deploying. But at the end of the day, right, in our case, none of our clients, in your case, none of the people that use your product, right? Like, we're not doing governance or data for the sake of it, right? We need to enable business outcomes, right? There's something bigger that our clients want to do. and governance is just in the path, right? So it's just incumbent on us to figure out, how do we enable governance? How do we enable trust and stewardship over the data and whatever we're deploying in a way that doesn't stand in the way of what needs to be done, right? So the way I approach this question is, AI is going to happen whether we want to or not, right? Like, it's imperative that companies adopt this and figure out how it helps their bottom line. And it's incumbent on us to figure out, how do we do it in a trusted way? And that's my view on governance.
Let's back up a little bit. I think I like the way that you approach this question. It's from a perspective of what you're trying to solve for your customers.
Mhm.
When I engage with customers, my job is to help them to get the data quicker, help them bring that, whether it's a lake or whether they're in a warehouse or whether they are in different cloud environments or whatever. My job is to bring that data forward quickly. And for AI initiatives, it's a great help, right? Because it's about getting more data into the right engine so that we can start to actually leverage and create new answers. And so my job is to load the data. And absolutely, every single time we start these initiatives, the first question is that data good enough? Is my data governance good enough? What do I need to change? And it sounds like you're dealing with the same type of challenge. When you answer that question, is it good enough? I don't think there's a measurement. I don't think there are certainly a number of maturity standards we could point at, but I think my argument, let's see if you disagree. I would say, you work with what you have, right? Whatever you have right now has to be good enough because it's what you have. What you can't do is say, well, give me 2 months, give me 6 months, give me a year to fix it. No. Whatever you have today has to be good enough. That's the starting point. You can start using AI today with the right lens, with the right transparency. Would you agree, or would you say no? Let's go do some. You have to get some principles in place first at a minimum.
Yeah. So I think two things. Number one, if you're waiting to have enough data, you're going to be waiting forever, right? Data is always being created. You're never going to have all the data. So I agree that it's more important to get started and learn from the data that you have. Maybe that'll help you identify what data sets you need versus ones you can do without, et cetera. So completely agree with the notion of, you probably have enough now to get started, whatever that now looks like, and then it'll inform what you need to supplement going to the future. The other thing that we encounter often is, I think, built into that perception that more data is always better.
Yeah.
You lose track of the could versus should, right? The fact that you have data available doesn't necessarily mean that you have to use it, right? And you start getting, at best, kind of fool's errands, right? You start going down rabbit holes where there's nothing there to be found, right? And you just went down the rabbit hole because the data was there. And then kind of towards the opposite end, right? The end you want to avoid, you start getting misinformation, right? You start getting results that you backed your way into because you wanted to use all the data where it wasn't necessary, right? So you start skewing your results, you start getting insights that maybe aren't what you should have gone to. So again, I think not only do companies probably have enough to get started and wrapping their head around what they can do with AI and data, I would also caution, like, be wary of trying to use all the data at your disposal and always wanting more, because again, it's going to take you down rabbit holes that you probably don't need to go down.
Yeah. So let's tackle that, right? So we're dealing with a new client, and they are starting a big AI initiative, right? Whether it's a generative AI initiative or predictive analytics, whatever it is, right? They've got a big AI project, and we're coming in and we're going to help them. And so we do a quick assessment for their existing estate. We understand their architecture, we understand their governance processes. We know who owns data, we know who uses data, we know where the data is coming from, and we know where it needs to go. Awesome. We sit down and say, okay, so good news, bad news is, good news is you've got a framework that we can work with, right? And I would say, never say never, right? But for the most part, everyone's got, like I said a second ago, I'll reiterate it. Everyone's got a framework that you can start with, right? Wherever you are today is a great starting point. The question is, where do I need to go quickly, right? And so I would say, I don't think you need to reset data governance, right? There is a data management book of knowledge that every CDO out there, every data governance expert out there kind of relies on. And that the processes and descriptions and the structures in that DM box, so to speak, are the same. I would argue that in the world of AI, the first thing I would do is I would say, what can I automate, right? Here's the way that data governance today. I know that I want to deliver AI for the business. I get it. But how can I leverage AI for data governance teams? How can I leverage AI for the CDO? And so the first thing I would do is I would look for ways to automate. I'll give you two ideas, and maybe you can see if you've heard of others, right? One is, I've seen organizations use AI, and it's been around for a while, right? Back in my CDO days as well. I mean, we were able to use AI to help us do data classification, right? And so they were industry focused algorithms out there. You could come in, they would basically look at data sets and would help you classify data, right? So AI for data classification was one. AI for metadata was another one, right? Where if I'm being honest, I don't know that I've seen one that works really well at that time. More recently, I've talked to customers and I've seen technology out there that are getting much better at actually helping to not just integrate metadata, but actually fill in the blanks for metadata. So some of that is classification, but some of that is other elements as well. And so AI for metadata, I think, is huge. What else have you seen where people are applying AI for data governance?
So first of all, everyone is already somewhat of their way down the governance journey, right? But for the sake of this argument, let's say that we're working with someone that is very early in their journey, right? Very immature governance organization. It's like these things sound basic, but they're just as relevant now as they were 10 years ago, right? And it's funny, you kind of kicked us off saying like governance should have been figured out by now. I remember I worked with a client about 5 years ago that basically summed it up by saying like, this is a nut that should have been cracked like 15 years ago. Right? Like this has been a thing for a long time and it's still a thing. And I think you hit it on the head, right? This isn't about saying like, throw out the governance book, like AI changes everything. No, if you've built an organization, a governance organization, right, you've accounted for change coming along your way, right? So it's imperative to figure out what's similar about this, right? What can we continue doing because it's just as applicable to AI as it was to master data management 10 years ago versus what's new. A lot of that metadata management, data enrichment, just sound data stewardship is still just as relevant now as it was back then, right? All that work still needs to happen. And fortunately, there are third-party data sets, there are automation capabilities. There's all these ways where we can do that stewardship and maintenance of the inputs, right? The raw data going into these models, way more streamlined than we could when I started doing all of this, right? And that metadata management, data enrichment, right? Things as simple as using Gen AI to generate like material descriptions, right? And just making sure that things follow standards and so on, that goes a long way in governance. On the other side, you have to think, okay, what's different about this, right? And again, I'm not jumping to the conclusion that I need to revamp my governance organization. I'm just asking, what about this presents challenges to the current model? One of them are the new types of data being created, right? With AI in general, this whole notion of going after unstructured data and embeddings and indices and all these things, a little bit trickier to manage, right? It's very easy to look at a customer master record and say, I know what data standards I need to apply here. The question around what makes a sound index, okay, a little bit trickier to answer, right? What does governance look like for all these new data sets and all this new data that's being created as part of AI? And I think that straddles that line that you mentioned at the beginning between governance of the data that goes into AI with the governance of AI and its outputs, right? That's, to me, in a topic that's been around for decades now, that's the new element that's being injected now. I don't think you need to throw out, like you said, the DEMBOK and just start from scratch. You just need to focus on, okay, I can still continue to do all these things, right? And make sure that the inputs into these models are sound and they're being governed. And we have a way to do that already. And then the question then becomes, how do I, again, going back to what we said earlier, how do I tackle the new without getting in the way of it, right? Yeah. I don't want to slow down my development, but I do want to make sure that we're being careful about it. And that's where the tricky part lies.
Let's go into that piece. How do I tackle the new without causing a reset, causing a big weight, so to speak, leveraging what I have? To summarize where we just came from, so we're breaking this up into two boxes. The first box is data governance foundation and how we can use AI to improve that. We talked about using AI to drive things like data classification, to do metadata. There's also AI tools out there you can use for data quality, to do data quality checks. And more recently, I've seen some really nice AI capabilities for access management, where you can use an AI engine to actually sit and learn and look at the way data sets are being accessed, and then either raise an alert or create access policies, attribute-based access policies to determine exactly whether or not data sets should be accessed. And so this is new, but it's fantastic. When you have a lot of people accessing a lot of data, you need that automation. And what the automation does is, in the AI world, I need access to all my data. I don't have the time to wait for the old traditional data governance processes. I still need to do those things. We're not saying throw them away. We're saying automate them, right? So that's the first part of the conversation. Now we're crossing the bridge into AI. And the question that you asked a second ago is really, I think, in a different way, but I think is it really good enough? I was talking to an AI expert in San Francisco last week, somebody from OpenAI. They had given a presentation, pulled them aside, having a quick chat. And we're talking a little bit about how much an AI engine can actually, can you configure, can you design your AI engine to overcome data governance, right? And so in a world, we know data isn't perfect, but we're still have some amazing AI solutions out there with bad data. We have amazing AI solutions out there with bad data governance. So how are we doing that? And I think there is an element of saying the AI engine itself, you can train it and you can design it to deal with variability.
Yeah.
If you feed perfect data into the AI engine, and then you toss the AI engine into the real world with imperfect data, it ain't gonna work, right? So you have to be able to train the engine with the data that it's going to see in the real world. So I think in that middle part, so to speak, is it good enough where you can balance even some bad data governance or bad data quality or bad data classification? You can balance that by training the engine in the right way. Do you agree?
I do, with some caveats, right? So if we start, so let's take the sort of age-old use case and policy management area of governance, right? Before all of this, right, 10 years ago, it was very easy for you to write up a policy and say, from now on, I will follow this policy, right? And you're right, data quality takes a while to kind of catch up, right? If you had data standards for what a customer looks like, it didn't mean that when you switch it on, it's all going to be perfect, but it was easy to identify issues and easy to draw up a path to what perfect looked like. It was very discrete, right? You could go from white to black very quickly. Every time you said training, you highlighted on what part of the challenge is now, right? Are there AI approaches to this? Yes, there are, but none of them come out of the box, right? All of them are reliant on what data you're using to inform the model to train it, right? There's got to be a grace period in there where you allow the model to just make mistakes. It will make mistakes and learn from them, right? So you need the right safeguards around that approach to make sure that as the AI gets better and better at doing exactly what you said, right? Automating that part of governance that is very difficult to do manually, you need to give it some grace, right? You need to allow room for it to get it wrong, which then takes me to one of the main conversations we're having recently, right? Which is, it's less to do with technology. It's actually around letting technology do what it needs to do in a way that, again, this is where the slow down conversation typically comes in, right? Because it's typically perceived as we're going to slow down development, when what we are really trying to do is we need some safeties here, right? We need some safety nets. We need some padded walls for the AI to kind of get it wrong in a way that it doesn't cause like a material impact, right? There's so few ways to get this right and so many ways to get it wrong that we need to make sure that if and when something does go wrong along the way, it's not like it won't bring your company down, right? It won't be a data breach. It won't be a violation of compliance and regulations, right? So that's a lot of the when it comes to governance around, and again, right on the line between governance of data for AI and governance of the AI models themselves, it's acknowledging how the thing works, right? It has to learn, it has to get it wrong sometimes, it has to be informed around how to get better. And that approach that was taken in the past of drafting a policy and then saying this policy goes immediately into effect, data cleansing team, go fix it, that doesn't transfer here, right? Some of the core principles transfer, but that approach doesn't transfer one-to-one to what we're seeing now.
Yeah. Awesome. So middle box, to close the middle box piece, is data. Is it good enough? There's certainly, as we just described, the idea that you can adjust for some bad data. You can manage the data you're dealing with just by the way that you design your AI engine. Then we get to the third box, arguably the most important box. Now we're in the AI world, right? Now I've automated data governance with AI. Awesome. I've thought about how I can design better AI engines to deal with or to accept or to just for the most part manage the data that I'm given, so to speak. And now I'm in the AI world. And I think when I think about the AI world and I think about the use cases, there are use cases for sure. Let's think about a use case. Let's see if I can think of it real quickly, where AI is absolutely requires almost perfect data governance, where the data has to be good, right? Where I don't have the room for error is tiny, right? Where I need to make sure that my data governance is tight end to end. And these are some of the areas where I think you see AI maybe moving the slowest, right? And if we had a room of AI experts, they would argue that because everybody says AI is moving fast everywhere. But let's take patient care, right? And so, if you build a patient 360 model and you're trying to bring data sets forward to different consumers, you're dealing with different kinds of consumers. You got clinicians over here, you got billing experts over here, you got patients over there, you got maybe hospital partners or networks over there, and everyone's using data differently. But maybe there's a physician in an ER that's dealing with an AI engine. Maybe the AI engine isn't, I'm not saying they're doing surgery, but I'm saying the AI engine is helping recommend or identify different scenarios or situations that surgeon or that doctor may need to take care of. And maybe that's too advanced. Maybe it's just a doctor treating a patient.
Yeah.
The data governance there needs to be spot on, right? You can't misdiagnose. You can't make a mistake. You're risking somebody's life. And so if I'm building an AI engine that's helping somebody in patient care, the data governance needs to be perfect, not only from a security perspective, meaning I'm not going to expose the wrong data, but even more importantly, just from an accuracy perspective, I can't get the data wrong because the outcome could be devastating for somebody's life. Yeah.
So it's funny. When I think about this, when I think about how these solutions are deployed, right? I think a good way of thinking about it is in terms of like index funds, right? Like these large, these LLMs that are out there, they're essentially the equivalent of like a total index fund, right? You're investing in the entire market. You're taking the equivalent of kind of the sum total of knowledge, which you hope is as unbiased as it gets and so on, right? But when you get into a commercial setting, you don't want to be 100% unbiased, right? You want to have maybe a little bit of bias towards your product. You maybe wanted to learn from confidential information that wasn't available to the LLM, right? So we start thinking, all right, how do we augment, right? And this is where RAG and terms like that come in. How do I take an LLM and then give it an edge, right? Give it access to some non-public information that we as an organization have that's going to make a better recommendation come surgery time or anything like that, right? And at that point, again, going back to my financial analogy, you now have, yes, the majority of your funds in a total index fund, but you're now taking like a tech-focused ETF, right? You're giving your portfolio a little bit of bias. You're leaning it one way or another. That's where I think governance comes in when it comes to the world of AI, right? In most commercial settings, I would argue you want to give it a little bit of bias, right? Because the LLM in itself is just going to have public information that gives you no edge over anyone else. How you give it the edge, right? How a human decides what bias do I want to give this model? What edge, what information do I want to give it access to? Understanding also that you're going to give it raw inputs, right? The model is going to draw maybe different conclusions that a human would have drawn, right? So you're not only governing the information that goes into it, you're also allowing the model itself a certain degree of freedom to make its own conclusions and then decide in itself what the best recommendation is. In your surgery example, maybe the model wouldn't recommend the same thing that doctor with 30 years recommended, right? And in that case, who do you go with, right? The sort of gut feel of the doctor that's done it for 30 years or what this new model that's 6 months old is recommending, right? So there's a lot of thought that needs to go into the conscious bias that goes into some of these models and how that is managed. Kind of peeling back the onion, there's also these things are being developed at a speed that we haven't seen before, right? So these indices, these things that drive the augmentation of these LLMs, they have these functional implications, like the quality of the recommendations that come out of it and everything, but they also present like traditional data management problems, right? These models are big, right? There's a lot of data here. You don't want to be creating duplicate data sets, right? So there needs to be some governance over how the model is augmented, right? Which, yes, has a data component, but there's also process implications and all that stuff. So once you kind of start peeling back the onion, to me, when it comes to the governance of AI itself, there's a lot to do specifically around the augmentation of LLMs to suit them to your organization. And that's where a lot of the conversations we're having go to. And again, this is a rabbit hole that I can go deep down in.
Yeah.
But maybe maybe we can tackle that topic on its own in a follow-up session.
I love it. And I want to go the opposite, right? I want to contrast this use case with a different use case. I'm a CDO. I'm sitting in front of a board, and all the board wants to know is, what the heck am I doing on the AI side? What are my competitors doing? and how am I going to beat them, right? What are we going to do better that's going to create market differentiation for whatever we're doing? I don't care if I'm a bank or a hospital or pharmaceutical, right? And so without a doubt, there are examples on the AI side that I would say, we're going to do this. We're going to start doing it. But we have to move slowly, right? We need to work at looking at different ways to improve governance in these areas so that we can make sure we get this right. There's no room for error. We're not waiting forever because we're going to use AI to automate some of the governance to get us where we want to get. Now, the good news is I've got a number of use cases, and I will argue this, right? There are a number of use cases out there that you can deliver effective AI right now, even if your data governance is so, right? The example is really if I am dealing with trending data. So a lot of these big AI engines, right? They're dealing with large amounts of data, and they're looking for trends. Maybe they're looking for new patterns. The accuracy of a customer address, right? Or the accuracy of a name. There's some things that just don't matter, right? And if I'm out there as a data governance agent, boiling the ocean, trying to fix every bit and byte, forget it, right? I'm never going to get there. You need to really think about the use case and what the engine has been trained to do and what the engine is trying to decide. And I think you'll realize a lot of use cases absolutely can use the data exactly the way it is today. And to your point a second ago, you want to train it with that real data, right? You want to train it with real life data. So there's a lot that we should do. I think the use cases that require perfect data governance, I think those today, are the minority. I think the use cases that can use the data as it is, the AI use cases, are the majority. There's a lot more out there to go out to deliver. I'm not saying you don't need data governance. I'm saying data governance is probably good enough, and you can start now while you improve it.
Well, it's funny because I would argue that governance is also knowing when something doesn't need to be governed, right? So to me, governance isn't everything needs to be very strict. No, a sound governance organization also knows what those and actually takes us back to what my argument would be, which is it's all use case driven, right? It's a risk reward conversation, right? Most people, when they think Gen AI and AI in general, they think very customer-facing solutions, right? That to me is high risk, high stakes, right? There's a lot to gain, but if you get it wrong, it's very public and all that stuff. But there are plenty of internal use cases, to your point, where with the data exactly like it is today, what about, so AI can be used to kind of, large organizations, ton of data out there, a lot of it's folks on the business, right? Not technically savvy people, can be apprehensive around kind of diving and taking on the enormity of all the data that's available to them. That's a phenomenal AI use case, right? How do we abstract the complexity of navigating that data away from the people that just want answers, right? And can we deploy Gen AI solutions in almost like an ask a warehouse kind of setup, right? Where you can deploy Gen AI in a very safe manner, right? Relatively speaking, it's internal. So if you get it wrong, there's no external damage done to a subset of users. And you use Gen AI to empower business teams in a way that they haven't been empowered before. That is a perfectly valid use case. We're doing it today. No extra burden on governance. Great way for you to kind of dip your toe in the world of AI without the necessary, dire consequences if you get it wrong, right? So again, I'll go back to something we said earlier, right? There's this notion that it's so flashy, it's so big, it's so new that it must be daunting. It doesn't need to be. Right. And from a governance perspective, there are use cases that are going to warrant heavy governance, and there are others where what you have now is probably just fine.
Yeah. And neither one of us is saying you don't need it. All we're saying is that it's unrealistic for anybody out there to say, wait on AI, stop AI, pause AI, you got to fix it first. All we're saying is there are use cases that you can leverage your existing data governance the way it works today. And there are use cases that were required for you to definitely take an upgrade. But if you're going to take the upgrade, you use AI. I think we have time for one more piece because I wanted to come back to this AI governance. And this is great for both of us. If I've got Slalom in the room, and so I've come in and I've just implemented, so real use case, right? So we go in and my job typically is to look at a broader strategy, right? And so we've got Starburst, great. Starburst is implemented. We're starting to bring data forward. We started to create data products that our consumers can use, and data products maybe that we're feeding to AI engines. Strategically, and so you can imagine me and you sitting across a table from a customer team. I love to look at the AI governance framework, right? And not everyone has one yet, right? It's a new thing, right? Data governance has been around for a long time. AI governance is new, right? There will be an AI governance book of knowledge written at some point, hasn't been written yet. But when we think about the AI governance framework, data governance is a pillar without a doubt.
Mhm.
Ethics, maybe that's tied to it, is another pillar without a doubt. The kind of idea about resource management and how where you get the right resources to fulfill the capabilities, so to speak, is another pillar. And so I won't go through the whole, that's probably a different show, walking through what an AI governance framework looks like. But when we're sitting there with a customer, Slalom, Starburst customer, we're talking through what they're trying to accelerate with their AI governance framework. I think first and foremost, the most important thing that we need to think about is urgency, right? There's got to be a feeling in the room that we've got to find a way to make this work. The second most important thing, I think, is ownership. We need to make sure that there's clear ownership, whether we're talking about the AI solution or whether we're talking about the data sets. And the third thing that I think is also really important is security, right? For that AI framework, right? And there's a lot of different layers to security, but AI governance is its own separate entity that I think we're still developing. And when you start to think, there's a question here. Sorry, Alfredo, I'm stuck in my thought now. But when we start thinking about the AI framework, I think there's a balance there, right? That you can when you look at the whole framework and you can assess your strengths and weaknesses, you can say, I've got really good governance. That means I can move faster here. I've got really weak governance. That means I have to overcome that weak governance with maybe more security or maybe more review. And so the AI framework, I think, allows you to take a better balance of everything in your supply chain, if you will, and determine whether you can run, whether you need to crawl, and what things you need to fix. It's a bigger picture. From a Slalom perspective, how have you guys looked at that bigger AI governance framework?
So I think it all starts with acknowledging that it isn't just data governance, it isn't just software governance, it isn't just cloud governance, right? AI dips its toes in all these things, right? Yeah. So again, at 100,000 feet, we need a lay of the land, right? Even if, at the risk of putting something together that seems daunting, we want to make sure that nothing's falling through the cracks, right? So we need to map out all the areas within your organization that could be touched by this AI solution. And again, that covers everything from the very traditional, architectural review boards and stuff like that. But what about, legal and privacy concerns and all that stuff, right? So once we have that map of the whole universe that could be affected, then it's a matter of, to your point, because of that sense of urgency, balancing how much we dial up or down each area, right? And again, that goes back to that use case kind of risk reward model. But it's when we think about governance models, like we try to work backwards from what are the customer implications, right? What are the people implications of this? And therefore, which areas do we need to dial up or down? The added element here that would be very different from work that would have been done 5 years ago is that urgency component that you mentioned, right? Yeah. The direction to make sure that we're not standing in the way of innovation and standing in the way of deploying this functionality, because of the speed at which things happen in AI, is more imperative now than it's been in the past, right? So the new element injected into governance now is it's governance with a fire lit under you, right? Where the stakes have never been this high, but the urgency has also never been this high. Yeah. And again, that's to kind of land the plane, right? Like that is so subject to company culture, right? If you're a company in a heavily regulated industry, the stakes are much higher, right? If you are a company that delights customers for a living and the stakes are low, you maybe can move faster and that governance style comes down, right? So it's very subject to culture. It's very subject to industry context. And that's where we start, right? Is by understanding that context and then working our way towards a solution.
I think this is the topic. We started talking data governance, but I think as we get more mature with dealing with AI, I'm not saying, again, data governance is still important, but I think we will start to talk about AI governance from a bigger picture, and that becomes the thing. Data governance, part of my AI governance. And so it's one pillar of the bigger framework. I think if all you're doing is talking data governance, you're missing the bigger picture, the bigger required picture to govern AI effectively. And so you got to look at it from that perspective. Let me start to close up, and we'll do it together, and just make sure I don't miss anything. Yep. I think we started the conversation talking about some great dishes, a Puerto Rican dish versus a Mexican dish. I love Puerto Rican food, and so I don't know. You might beat me on that one. Although my chile relleno is really good. Maybe we'll compete someday. Right. But then we got into the real topic, right? And we broke it up into 3 boxes. We said, let's talk a little bit about traditional data governance. And our conclusion there was you can use AI to automate traditional data governance.
Some of it, yes.
Some of it. And then we said, okay, and the key there is you can leverage what you have. You don't have to reset. You can make it faster. You can make it better with automation. Then we got into the middle box to say, okay, so now I'm crossing over into the AI world, and we accepted we've been working data governance for a long time. We're not going to make it perfect overnight. And so you have to leverage what you have. It's got to be good enough. And we talked about the idea that in the AI engine itself, you can design it to overcome some maybe data issues. And as you described, you want your AI engine to deal with real data sets, right? You want it to deal with what it's going to deal with or see in real life, so to speak, right? And so there's a notion of designing the AI engine to live and manage the data that it's being dealt with, so to speak, or that it's being fed.
Real data controlled environment. Yeah.
Real data controlled environment. Actually, that's a much more eloquent way to say it than what I just did. Then we got to the third box, right? The third box is all AI. And we said, look, when you start looking at your AI use cases, one, we said urgency, we said speed, we said you don't need to wait, right? There are use cases that you can execute right now that we are already executing right now on the AI side. We're not saying they don't need data governance, but we're saying your data governance is already good enough for those use cases. And then there are other use cases where you might want to take a pause, right? And like you said, if you're a company that's about pleasing customers and that's all you're trying to do, and maybe you've got more variability to make errors, that's okay. You're a customer dealing with patients' lives, you're dealing with progress management, you're dealing with something really big, data governance becomes more important. And so there are use cases that require you to have a heavier hand for governance, absolutely. And then we closed up and saying, if we understand those three boxes, and we didn't do a comprehensive job talking about AI governance, but I think what we're saying is you need to step back and really look at the bigger balance. If you want AI to succeed, it's not just data governance alone. There's a lot to it. And all the different pillars, so to speak, data governance being just one of them, and maybe access management, maybe resources, maybe prioritizing use cases in an agile way, all that becomes your house, so to speak, your AI governance house. You have to be able to manage the whole picture to be successful. That was our discussion, I think. Alfredo, did I miss anything?
No, I think that covers it. Good
awesome. Well, that was great. I think we went over a little bit, but I really appreciate your experience, and two, it's always great to have Slalom on the show. So I look forward to cooking with you in the future. Thank you so much.
Same here, man. Good to be here.